So is anyone experiencing deja vu? The New South Wales Premier calls for COVID-style protocols as fuel crisis explodes.
We are going to talk about Elijah's loud cry, Sister Joana de Bram. Here is a woman that I love to listen to because she's done her homework. This one is entitled, This Was Planned, A Coming Bondage and Liberty. You're hearing about what's going on with Iran, oil crisis, gas prices, and many other concerns. We have yet to understand what's going on with the Epstein files, but let's not talk about that now. But we have this crisis in our hands that is going to impact all humanity. And for those of you who don't know, we're already feeling it here in Pennsylvania. The gas prices are already biting. So this woman has done some serious research in this one, and I'm going to share a part of that to you. She's going to do some deep digging, and I plan on having her on AMC. We have to go through this, and I'm going to ask some more questions because I know there's some more stuff being revealed as we talk about this. Much more is being revealed. And I'll tell you what, I love me some Joana de Bram's ministry, and I really appreciate some of her research and some of the things that she's discovered and uncovered regarding the Adventist Church, the UN connection, and many of these issues that has plagued our church. And you understand the religious liberty issue, how big of a thing it is when you listen to her. And I tell you, I added her as top 10 of my, preaching list among 7 Adventist ministers. She's definitely top 10. Anyway, I'm going to put a link in the description below. I'm only going to play part of this. And I want you to hear her thought. I'm only going to play about 20 minutes. And I'm going to skip at the end and play the final thought that she gave as well. Listen carefully to what this woman is exposing about this war, the plan, how intentional this has been, and this has been laid out since 1970-something. Friends, this is shocking stuff. Now, take a listen.
So the cognitive dissonance that's being generated by this, everything's okay, don't stress. And then the reality that we see at the petrol bowser and that we hear from other people and that we read in the other media actually creates more fear and anxiety in people's minds. They start going, well, we're going to run out of food because the trucks can't, transport the food. Are we going to run out of electricity because we can't get the fuel for the coal mines? And they can't get the fuel for the trains to bring the coal down to the coal-fired energy plants. And then you get things like this. The New South Wales Premier calls for COVID-style protocols as fuel crisis explodes. If we've got PTSD over COVID, seeing something like that's really going to trigger it. Is this a sudden, unexpected geopolitical event, or has it been planned like COVID was? I guarantee you it was planned. Has this been planned as well? What I'm going to show you today, I absolutely believe it has been planned, and it's been a long time planning. They don't just plan these things, they like to drop hints along the way. It's almost like they're playing a game. We're letting it out there, but you don't know. But the people who are in the know, they know what we're saying. Okay, we used to produce most of our oil products. Yep. So this is a report from the government in 1980, I think it was 7, the report is. By 1984 to 85, we were producing 85% of our fuel. By the time the year 2000 rolled around, we were producing 98% of our petroleum products. But by the time we're here, we're importing 90% of our products. Why is that? Is it because we've run out of fuel? No. We actually have 42 years worth of oil reserves, and this is a little map of where they are. The reason why is because we're committed to the net zero emissions by 2050, which is a UN initiative. And it's really what we know as the climate change agenda. So instead of drilling for more oil, we're actually aligning ourselves with this report from the International Energy Agency. And these are some of the recommendations that they actually have in there. I've just highlighted some of them because it kind of echoes of COVID again. So encourage public transport use. So they actually are saying, you know, you can only use, I mean, what kind of public transport do we have in rural communities? Seriously. Alternate day car access in big cities. So you can go into the city if you have a even number plate on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday. And then if you have an odd, it's, you know, Tuesday, whatever, Thursday and maybe Saturday, but not Sunday. I can guarantee you there will be no traveling. And then work from home wherever possible. They won't be called lockdowns because that would probably make us all think that maybe they're just the COVID thing was a practice run. But if you can't travel anywhere because you've got no fuel and you're not allowed to travel, it is a lockdown. And I find this one interesting, the avoid air travel if an alternative exists. And the reason why I find that particularly interesting, because the chief of the IEA, the International Energy Agency, he had to fly here this last week to deliver this report. I mean, are you serious? If we're meant to actually avoid travel, why didn't he just have a Zoom meeting? But no, he had to come and meet with our Prime Minister. Now, if you look at all of the Western nations around like the globe, the more developed nations, Australia was probably leading the forefront in lockdowns during COVID. We were the test case for how far you can push a Western developed nation to the point of breaking. And this, I believe, is the reason why he turns up this week to Australia to meet the Prime Minister. It is the new WHO, but it's for the coronavirus as opposed to COVID. It is the IEA. You read any articles that are talking about predicting things, you'll hear the International Energy Agency has said this. So what is the International Energy Agency? Oh, hang on, let's talk about the chief of it. So the guy that flew here to Australia, who is he? Well, 2024, this article says, the world's wiliest climate warrior. And they mention things like, is it, you know, what's her name, Greta Thunberg? Is it this other person that's really famous from an energy? No. You know who it is? It's this guy. It says, the International Energy Agency boss, Fatih Birol, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name wrong. No, it's Fatih, F-A-T-I-H. A lifelong bureaucrat with roots in the oil industry has made the net zero transition a personal mission. So he has this job of jetting around the world once again to Davos, COP and the UN General Assembly to cajole, collaborate, collude and campaign to achieve his net zero for climate change. So what is the IEA? The IEA is part of the OECD. Sorry, acronyms, they love them. What is the OECD? It is the Organization for the Economic Cooperation and Development, the Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development, which came out of, at the end of World War II, the European powers got together and cooperated, and that was the OEEC, and then it changed to the OECD by 1961. In 1971, it became a permanent observer of one of the arms of the UN, and then in 1998, it became a permanent observer of the UN General Assembly. But what I find really interesting is, as soon as it joins up with the UN in 1971, in 1972, the UN has its first environmental conference. Very first one that they've had. And it's called the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. Because of course, if you say that it's about eliminating humans and just keeping everything nice for the environment, that would be just a little bit too obvious. It's got to be all about the human environment. But it's actually the basis for what we know as environmental sustainability and the net zero policies. It is the beginning of it. So the OECD has just joined up with the UN, and they're coming out with this. Do we see this reflected in the OECD? Yes. We've got to phase out inefficient support for fossil fuels as soon as possible to enable the release of much needed resources for the net zero transition and energy efficiency innovation. So you tell me if the IEA, the International Energy Agency, part of this, which is then aligned to the UN, which is all about net zero, this guy that's coming to Australia, whose personal mission is to go for net zero, do you think he came here to make sure that Australians have a happy and prosperous and free life? No. 2 years after the 1972 UN Environmental Conference, the OECD formed the International Energy Agency. And this is what they came out with. So this is this guy that came to Australia. He works for the International Energy Agency, formed in 1974. They came out with the International Energy Program. Well, if it was actually all about environmental stuff, we should see that reflected in their plan. Is that not true? And that is true. We are determined to reduce their dependence, this is the countries that are joined up with them, on imported oil by undertaking long-term cooperative efforts on conservation of energy, on accelerated development of alternative sources of energy. And they talk about, making sure that each participating country shall have a thing put in place to restrain the use of oil products. And they will continue to assess this and review it and continue to make different recommendations that the participating countries, such as Australia, have to implement. They talk about putting emergency measures in place that every participating country has to implement within 15 days. They talk about, once again, conservation of energy, and then they list, I've put a box around it, solar energy. They do mention coal energy, which I thought was interesting, but solar, radioactive, controlled thermonuclear, production of hydrogen from water, nuclear safety, waste heat utilization. You've got to remember, this is 1970s. So this is the beginning of this period. They are aiming, this is the beginning of where we are now. Let's remove your dependence or your ability to depend on petrochemicals and other carbon-emitting sources of energy and replace it with something else. And do you know who actually has the greatest control over this organization? It just happens to be the most powerful militarily and financially organized country in the world, which is America. If you look at their voting, I'm not sure, this was at the time, I'm not sure what their voting is now, but I'd say it's pretty much remained the same. They have like the largest ability to vote in that organization. So they actually literally control it. Each participating country shall implement legislative measures. And so Australia, as a good little country that we are, in 1979 we joined with the IEA and we put out a piece of legislation in 1984. And that piece of legislation, called the Liquid Fuel Emergency Act, remained the same for 41 years until December 2025. How odd. I'm not going to say anything more about that because I just think that's odd. An act to facilitate, so this is what the purpose is, an act to facilitate the management of liquid fuel that is or likely to be in short supply. Now remember the figures I just gave you before. Almost 2/3 of our fuel at that point in time, when this was written, was self-sufficiently produced in Australia, and it went up from there. So why were they saying, oh, we've got to put this in place because it might soon be in short supply, and we've still got 42 years of oil in the ground. Now, at today's current consumption, were they planning something? And this is the guidance notes on how to actually implement this. So instead of, you remember the essential workers during COVID? You kind of felt like you were no longer essential human if you weren't an essential worker. Well, now they've got essential users with this particular act. And this is the guidance note. So you only, under the extreme emergency conditions, if you are an ambulance service, corrective service, and as it goes on, you can get fuel, but only if you're in a vehicle that is clearly marked as these things. So that's the extreme. So everyone else, I'm sorry you don't get any access to fuel. But, you know, as it says here, it is unlikely that fuel supply would ever be restricted to only users listed in the essential user determination. I wonder if that's going to be the case. No. No doctors, only ambulance, corrective, fire, police, public transport, state emergency services, and a taxi service. It doesn't leave anyone else. I mean, what are you going to do with your farm? If we can't get food, what's the point? It's not like, what, are you going to catch the taxi to an empty shop? Serious. So it's unlikely that fuel supply would ever be restricted to only users listed in the essential users determination. However, everyone else will receive a proportion of their normal fuel supply depending on the particular liquid fuel emergency circumstances, and it gives a bit of information. You might have a reduction of 10%, 30%, or 50% to the normal fuel supplies for 30 days. Now, once again, do you remember, we only need to lock down for 2 weeks, and then it was for 30 days, and then how long is this going to go on for? This is the same kind of language. Do you hear it? It is COVID 2.0. So many people have been looking for the next pandemic, the next virus, but the Bible actually doesn't foretell a virus that is going to end things. Yes, there are 7 last plagues, but it actually foretells a global financial control. It is going to be the crisis before God's wrath is poured out on this earth and he returns. Revelation 18:3 says, the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacy, and some of her merchandise is the slaves and souls of men. That's that K-shaped economy. Your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and silver is cankered. Money is not worth anything anymore. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that have a mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. This is a situation where money ceases to have intrinsic value and wealth is fully controlled by policymakers who enforce worship. Now, it's really interesting because if this is the end, like this is the end kind of events, obviously I'm not putting a date on, when it's going to really ramp up or anything like that, but if this is it, then surely there'd be some signaling. And you know what? There is. So I actually have another presentation that I did for another group a while ago where I actually looked at some of the things that are being said by the US commanders to their troops. Particularly when they very first started the war, and they were saying it's all part of God's divine plan, and they referred to Armageddon and the book of Revelation. Now, a lot of people go, oh, yeah, but they always did that. Whenever they go to any war that's involving Israel and that sort of thing, they were always doing that. But there is something significantly different this time, and it's the guy that's at the head of what they no longer call the Defense Department, they call it the War Department. The guy that's at the head, Pete Hegseth, is tattooed with Christian Crusader tattoos. Like, this guy is a full-on militant evangelical Christian Crusader. So this is his Juice Vault, which is I don't even understand exactly, but it's to do with Christian Crusades. But if you actually have a look down on the right-hand side, you can't see it very well in that picture, but on his shoulder, he has this a symbol on his shoulder, and if anyone knows history, that was the symbol that Constantine saw as a sign that he would have God's blessing to win the war that actually brought him into his throne. This guy is a Christian crusader at the head of the most powerful army in the world. And they are then telling their soldiers, this is the signal for Armageddon. This is going to unleash Armageddon. Now, I don't actually believe that Armageddon is just a war in Israel. I believe that it's primarily a spiritual war. But I do believe there are things that are going to be, happening from a physical perspective that will take us to that final crisis. God wills it, thank you. America is the financial and military superpower of the world, and so what they do actually matters. We need to take notice. A fully programmable digital currency with digital identity is the best way to have that K-shaped economy and to implement the mark of the beast. It's the only way that you can do it, because if someone can pull money out of a bank account and shove it onto their bed and go and buy their groceries from someone down the road who just happens to have a good veggie garden, there's no way you can control them. But if you can actually switch off their money because they're not complying, you can fully control them. So the best way to get to that point is have a massive financial reset. Now, I don't know whether you remember, I think it was last year, or it might have been the beginning of this year, I did a presentation called Financial Crash and Burn for those of you who were here. And I spoke about how we were heading towards a massive financial reset. Well, if you combine what I said back then, which was about how the AI economy, if it crashed, it would crash the world's global economy. The AI economy is based on petroleum as well. You need petroleum to produce the things in all of this stuff. So let's just go back to the best way to reset the financial system is to have a major world war. The grand plan is to have a major world war. If you look at World War I, this is where the gold standard started to break down. The greatest world economy, the UK, basically lost its wealth. This was the grounds for the Great Depression in the 1930s, and this was the grounds for World War II and the next level of financial restructuring that happened there. So World War I signaled the very beginning of where money no longer was stable in its value because it was no longer based purely on gold, and that policy started to control money. So during that whole period, you had World War I, a lot of the nations were going into debt because they didn't have enough money to actually produce, the equipment that they needed for war. So they started printing money. You can't print money and have gold start replicating to underpin the money. So it started to lose its value. By the end of World War II, the gold standard had completely abolished for pretty much all of the currencies, except for America. It was the only currency that was now based on gold. Every other currency was based on the American. And that's where you get what is known as the Bretton Woods Agreement. And the IMF and the World Bank were formed. And they became specialized agencies of the United Nations. And America was the primary funder for these. And whenever a country takes a loan from IMF or World Bank, they get stipulations. You have to do this as well. It's not just, here's your money, use it however you please. No, they have to implement policies. These policies are defined by America, ultimately. And there's another power behind them as well, which is the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy See. But that's another presentation. 1945, nuclear bombs create a whole bunch of fear. That's how you get people to do what you want. And then, of course, it was when the OEEC, which we spoke about, the International Energy Agency, is part of this. But by the time the end of World War II had passed, money had lost its value even more and become less stable, and you had more policy control. Then the Vietnam War. US started going into more and more debt. People started losing trust in the US dollar, and so they had US dollars to buy things because it was the reserve currency, and they had it pegged against gold that was in America. But they started to go, hang on, I don't like these US dollars, they're losing value, I want my gold back. And so America went, nuh-uh, you're not getting all your gold back. And so they ended the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1971. Interesting year, because 1971 just happened to be the same year that the OECD by now joins the UN. And then shortly after that, all countries go to a fiat currency, a variable value, no backing on gold at all, completely manipulated by policy. And then the Yom Kippur War. Seems like a really obscure war, but it was a surprise attack. And the oil-rich countries that were surrounding them went, anyone who's going to support Israel, we're going to have a trade embargo on fuel, and they can't have fuel anymore. So that's when we need to create the IEA, because the IEA will help us to actually deal with this fuel crisis, and it just happens to have the same policies as the UN. Maybe this was all a way to trigger the next financial reset. America enters into agreement after this Yom Kippur war with Saudi Arabia so that all the oil is traded only in American dollars, which is known as the petrodollar, which continues to create this situation where the American dollar is out on top. Every other country has to buy American dollars, which continually loses value. This is this whole thing. Their money is constantly losing its value, and you increasingly create debt within countries, and then you give them bailouts with IMF and the World Bank, and you control the nations. The Iran Revolution of 1978 and 1979 and the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988 just continued this whole thing of oil crisis, financial shock, money from the IMF and the World Bank, control of policy, and strengthening dependence on the US. So I'm not, as I said, I am not a prophet, but predictive history tells me that this war is actually about another financial reset. It's a financial reset that will be driven by a total financial global collapse brought about by overwhelming debt because we can no longer operate without our petrol. And of course, the UN's IMF and the World Bank will loan out some money and tell them, just to make sure you're using your money well, I want you to implement these laws, and there'll be laws linked to worship. And if you don't believe me that this is possible, which would be a fulfillment of Revelation 13, the UN already has these laws in place. So this is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which most countries of the world have ratified into their law. And in Article 18, it says, everyone has the freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs, but they may be subject to certain limitations, those limitations that are prescribed by law. Huh? You just told me I can practice my religious liberty, but not if someone makes a law saying that you can't. How is that religious liberty? And it's not even just to make sure that there's no anarchy, it's to preserve morals. Well, who defines the morals? Huh? So, you know, this is very much on the horizon. I'm certain, not 100%, but I'm pretty sure. We cannot fight it. This world is on a one-way track, and we cannot fight it. So Jesus said his kingdom is not of this world. So we can't go, but, you know, this is not fair. Well, it's not meant to be fair because this is not his kingdom. It's the way that it's going to go. We cannot fight it, but we don't need to fear.
Now, having heard something like that, all right, is very disturbing. Here's the good thing I love about what Joana the Bram does, all right? It's not doom and gloom. There's good news in here. Because the second part of the video, she began to speak about religious liberty, what that is. And you need to understand true religious liberty. And if you think it's about, you know, government giving you freedom, you're not thinking about it. True liberty is only found in Christ. And she breaks that down exceptionally well. So I'm going to let you fast forward. I'm going to fast forward to the end of this message so that you can hear this out. But if I were to make two references very quickly, number one, I will highly recommend The Captive Bride. Is written by Joana the Bram. I was on Amazon today, and it's out of print. But the good thing is AMC got a free PDF format already there on my website for you. So go to adventmediaconnect.org/bookstore/ and you can get the PDF format of this book, and you need to read that because we are in trouble. We are in trouble as a church when you understand what this woman has uncovered in not only on her sermons, but also in some of the things she reveals in that book. You know, friends, going back to what I've said earlier, true liberty is found in Jesus Christ. This is not a time for us to be afraid. It's time for us to be thoughtful and careful and prayerful. There's a quotation I want to leave you with. All right, let me read this quotation to you now. In a great conflict before us, he who will keep true to Christ must penetrate deeper than the opinions and doctrines of men. My message to ministers young and old is this: guard jealously your hours for prayers, Bible study, and self-examination. Set a portion of each day for a study of the scriptures and communion with God. Thus, you will obtain spiritual strength and will grow in favor with God. We want to pause right there. What are the three things that we are told to guard jealously if you want to be strong in these end times, knowing the crises that are ahead of us and how things are brewing right now? Your hours of prayer, Bible study, and self-examination. Guard them jealously. Okay. Having said that, let's go to the video from Joana now. So I want you to hear her final thought, because this is deep. Take a listen to what she says as she closes. Link to the full video in the description below. This was only part of it. Powerful stuff. Take a listen.
Maintained the liberty. Now I want to show you something really profound. Let there be, in Genesis chapter 1:3, is the very first phrase in thou shalt have in the 10 Commandments. The first commandment, I've brought you out of bondage, thou shalt have. That word, that phrase is let there be. He came to the world, brought it out of bondage, and he said, let there be, and the world became free. He begins the 10 Commandments the same way. If we are in harmony with God and we say, okay, Lord, let there be, we will always have freedom. And you know what? The same phrase that he gave to Adam and Eve where he said, thou shalt not eat of that tree, is the same phrase that you see repeated throughout the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not. If only they had have obeyed, we'd still be free today in every sense of the word. If we obey today, we will be free. But how do we do it? We need to have an encounter with God where he says, let there be. He has a transforming word. True liberty is the natural outcome of submitting to the presence of God and obeying his word. We don't need to worry about the coming crisis. It was planned. I know, I can see it, I can trace it, and I can hear some of you can see it too. Losing liberty is the natural outcome of not having God and not obeying his word. Final question, when was the most liberty? Day 5, when you just had the animals or the fish. Day 6, where you had the introduction of other creatures. What about day 6, when humanity was made and they were to start tilling the ground and start naming the animals? Or was it when they were resting with the Lord? Which had the most liberty? It was the Sabbath. That's actually when they experienced the greatest liberty. They had the birds and the fish. They had, the ability to fly and to swim. The animals, they had the ability to climb and swing from trees and all the rest of it. Humans have far more ability than all of them, but they still had work to do. On the 7th day, they could rest with the Lord. The greatest liberty that we can have is resting with Christ. And you know what? When were the most laws implemented? It was actually by the time they got to the 7th day, because then he introduces a law around rest and worship. Every other law has been introduced by that stage, but the final one around rest and worship is actually the final law. So there are laws coming into this world that are going to take away every single one of our physical freedoms. They're going to take away our money. They're going to take away our homes. They're going to take away our cars. They're going to take away our jobs. They're going to take away so much. But they can't take God. And God will always keep us free, because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. There is freedom. We do not need to be bound to that which disables us and keeps us on a path towards death, but we can be bound to that which gives us blessings and takes us to an eternal life, a path that will be eternal liberty.